On the morning of June 10, 1912, the small town of Villisca, Iowa, awoke to a nightmare. Inside a modest white house on the corner of 2nd Street, 8 people lay dead. A mother, a father, 4 children, and 2 young overnight guests. All brutally bludgeoned as they slept, their skulls crushed by the blade of an axe. But the horror did not end there. Curtains had been drawn. Every mirror in the home was covered. Doors were locked from the inside, and the killer even lingered long enough to cook a meal in the kitchen, before vanishing into the dark night. Despite multiple suspects, sensational trials, and over a century of speculation, the case remains unsolved. This is the story of the Villisca Axe Murders, one of America's most chilling mysteries. Villisca, in 1912, was a picture of small-town America. A farming community of just over 2,000 people. Everyone knew everyone. Doors were left unlocked. And crime was almost non-existent. Josiah Moore, also known as Joe Moore, was a respected businessman in the town. He was a husband, a father of 4, and an active member of the church. His wife, Sarah, was known for her devotion to both family and community. On Sunday, June 9, 1912, the Moores spent the day much like any other. They attended church. That evening, their daughter Catherine had invited 2 friends, Lena and Ina Stillinger, for a sleepover. The house was warm, lively, and safe. But as the town of Villisca went to sleep that night, no one could have imagined the terror that was about to unfold. By sunrise, the house on 2nd Street would become the scene of one of the most infamous mass murders in American history. What happened inside that house between midnight and dawn remains uncertain. What we do know is this: the killer likely entered while the family was asleep. There were no signs of forced entry. Some believe he was already hiding inside, waiting for the perfect moment. And sometime after midnight, he began his rampage. The axe was believed to be Joe Moore's own, left in a shed outside. With its blunt end, the killer struck Joe and Sarah Moore first. They never woke. Each blow was delivered with brutal precision. Then, he moved room by room. Herman, Catherine, Boyd, and Paul, all children under the age of 12. Slaughtered in their beds. Finally, he turned his rage upon the overnight guests, Lena and Ina Stillinger. Lena, just 12 years old, showed signs of being awake at the time of her death. Some have speculated about sexual assault, though this remains debated. But the horror didn't end with the killings. The crime scene told a story far stranger. Curtains were carefully drawn. Pieces of clothing were used to cover mirrors and reflective surfaces. A lamp had its chimney removed, dimming the light. A piece of bacon was left out on the floor. And in the kitchen, a plate of uneaten food sat waiting. It was as if the killer wanted to erase all identity, to shroud the house in darkness. Why would a murderer take the time to linger in a home filled with corpses? Was it ritual, regret, or something else entirely? Tell me your theories in the comments section. Could this have been the act of a wandering madman? Or someone much closer to home? The following morning, neighbors grew concerned when the Moores failed to appear for their daily chores. Mary Peckham, their neighbor, noticed the silence. When no one answered her knocks, she summoned Josiah's brother, Ross Moore. Ross entered the home and was met with a sight so horrific that he stumbled back in shock. Every bed occupied by lifeless bodies. Every face unrecognizable beneath the blunt force of an axe. The authorities were called, but by then, it was already too late. In 1912, crime scenes were not protected the way they are today. Word spread quickly. Neighbors poured into the house. Some even touched the bodies. Others took fragments of evidence as macabre souvenirs. By the time law enforcement gained control, the crime scene had been hopelessly contaminated. Clues that might have solved the case were destroyed forever. From that moment forward, the Villisca Axe murders were doomed to remain a mystery. Police struggled with the sheer brutality of the crime. They had never encountered anything like it. Some theorized it was the work of a local, someone with a grudge against Josiah Moore. Others whispered of a deranged drifter who had slipped into town, struck in the night, and disappeared into the countryside. But 3 suspects would emerge as the most serious. Each with motive, each with opportunity, and each, in their own way, a perfect fit for the role of killer. The first major suspect was Reverend George Kelly, a traveling preacher with a deeply troubled past. Kelly was known in Villisca as eccentric, even unstable. He had been accused of peeping into windows and of inappropriate behavior with women and young girls. On the night of the murders, he had attended the same church service as the Moores. He left town early the next morning, boarding a train before the bodies were discovered. Years later, he would confess. Not once, but multiple times. He described details that seemed to match the crime, but his confessions were inconsistent and often bizarre. At times, he claimed God had whispered to him. At others, he said he was simply at the house, watching. He was put on trial twice. The first ended in a hung jury. The second resulted in acquittal. Reverend Kelly walked free. But was he guilty, or just a disturbed man craving attention? Could this have been the real killer? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Another suspect was Frank Jones, a wealthy businessman and Iowa state senator. Jones had once employed Josiah Moore, but their relationship soured when Moore left to start his own company. Rumors spread that Moore had also been involved with Jones's daughter-in-law. Did Jones hire someone to eliminate his rival? Whispers pointed to William Blackie Mansfield, a man with a violent history who had worked odd jobs around Iowa. Some believed Jones had hired Mansfield as a hitman to kill Moore, and the entire family became collateral damage. But despite strong suspicions, Jones was never charged. His wealth and political connections made him nearly untouchable. Which brings us to William Mansfield himself. Mansfield was suspected in several other axe murders across the Midwest. Families slaughtered in their sleep, curtains drawn, axes left behind. The similarities were chilling. Some investigators believed Mansfield was the infamous man from the train, a suspected serial killer, responsible for dozens of similar crimes during that era. But in Villisca, evidence was circumstantial. Witnesses placed him elsewhere at the time. He was eventually cleared of all charges. And so, the case went cold. If none of these men were guilty, then who was? Some argue the murders bore the marks of ritual. The covered mirrors, the deliberate posing of bodies, the lingering in the kitchen. Could this have been the work of a cult? Or a killer driven by dark obsession? Others maintain it was Mansfield, a traveling axe murderer whose bloody trail stretched across states. And still others believe it was someone within Villisca itself. Someone who knew the Moores. Someone who simply got away with it. Over a century later, the Moore House still stands. Preserved as a grim museum, it has become one of America's most notorious haunted locations. Paranormal investigators claim to hear whispers, footsteps, even children's laughter echoing through the halls. But beyond the ghost stories, one truth remains undeniable. The killer was never caught. So, what do you think? Was this the work of a wandering serial killer? Or someone right there in Villisca? I'd love to hear your theories in the comments below. The Villisca Axe Murders are more than just a crime story. They are a window into fear itself, a reminder that evil can slip silently into even the safest of places. On that night in 1912, the town of Villisca changed forever. 8 innocent lives were taken. Justice was never served. And somewhere out there in the silence of history, a murderer walked away into the night and was never found. If you've made it this far, thank you from the bottom of my heart. If you want to explore more unsolved mysteries like this one, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps the stories alive.